Users often confuse lists and tables, although tables bring a lot of power to Excel and are necessary for using advanced tools like Power Query. But they also have many limitations that we want to explore. I am Nabil Murad. This tutorial moves fast from basic to spectacular power user functionalities of lists and tables, with so many hidden tips and tricks that you never heard about. I also show you some problems with tables that need the attention of the Excel developers team. We have a lot to learn, so let's get started. Here is my start file. You can download the exercise file and follow along by clicking on the link below this video. There are three confusing terms in Excel. These terms are range, list, and table. Excel is not a table. The term table has a completely different meaning in Excel. Excel is a grid-like structure divided vertically into columns and divided horizontally into rows. So let's differentiate the three terms. The first term is a range. A range is a group of cells. So if I click and drag, that's a range. This is another range. This is a third range. When I select a range, I do not look at the contents because I might have a range of blank cells, I might have a range of cells having contents, or I might have a range having partial contents. In all cases, I do not look at the contents when using the term range. Unlike a list, when I say this is a list, like the setup I have to the left side from column B to column G, I have four requirements in order to call it a list. Only the first requirement is a mandatory requirement, which is having column headers at top: date, region, manager, customer, cost of goods sold, and sales. This is the only mandatory requirement. And then I have three other requirements in order to call it a list. This improved the functionality of the list. Records arranged in rows. That's the second optional requirement. No blanks in between. That's the third optional requirement, and blank cells all around. That's the fourth optional requirement. Four requirements to call it a list. Only the first one, column headers at top, is the only mandatory requirement. And by the way, these are the same requirements for creating a pivot table. One mandatory requirement and three optional requirements. If you have this set up, you can call it a list. Then what is a table? A table is a list with more functionality. I have a list on the left side, I have a table on the right side, and they look exactly the same, but a table has more functionality than a list. How do I access this more functionality? Simply by clicking inside the table. Keep an eye on the ribbon. Right now I'm selecting the list, and when I click inside the table, an extra tab will pop up into the ribbon. When I click inside the table, here is the Table Design Contextual Tab, and because a table is a list with more functionality, Excel is offering me this extra functionality through the Table Design Contextual Tab. In order to differentiate a table from a list, never look at the formatting, the banded color of the rows. That has nothing to do with the functionality. Click inside the setup. If you don't see a contextual tab, then this is a list. If you click inside and you see a Table Design Contextual Tab, that means this is a table. Another way of differentiating a list from a table is by looking to the lower right corner. If you see this little icon, which is the resizing handle of a table, that means this is a table. You don't have this resizing handle in a list. We have three other methods for differentiating a list from a table. I'll be mentioning these methods along the way, but those were the two main methods for differentiating a list from a table. In the next worksheet, I'm going to show you 6 different ways of converting a list into a table. This is a list because there is no contextual tab appearing into the ribbon, and I want to convert it into a table. Method number 1 is to go to the Home tab with one single cell selected in the list. You don't need to click and drag to select the entire list, only one single cell selected, and then on the Home tab you click on the down arrow for Format as Table, and you have different styles. You can pick up whichever style you like. I'm going to select one of the styles. Let it be this blue one. The Format as Table dialog box pops up. Excel in the background was able to identify my list. That's because I have blank cells all around. That was the fourth requirement. And here is the mandatory requirement. My table has header, so this one is checked. Excel was able to identify the headers. All what I need to do is to hit OK, and I would have converted my list into a table. I'm going to undo Control Z to show you the second technique. The second way of converting a list into a table is to go to the Insert tab of the ribbon, and then I click on Table. The same dialog box pops up, and then I can hit OK. I can change that style at any time, as we'll see later. I'm going to undo Control Z. I can also convert my list into a table by using one of two shortcuts. These are method 3 and 4. I can use the old shortcut Control L. L stands for list. If I hit Control L, I get the same Create Table dialog box, and Excel is able to identify my list. I'm going to hit Escape. Instead, I can use the shortcut Control T. The same exact thing happens. Control T, T stands for table. These are two popular shortcuts in Excel. We have two other methods for converting a list into a table. So I'm going to hit Escape. And let's suppose I want to send this list to Power Query. Then if I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, and then I click from Table Range, that will automatically prompt Excel to convert this setup into a table, and the same dialog box pops up. In order to send it to Power Query, it has to be converted into a table. So although I didn't select Control T or Control L or Insert Table, or format as table, it has to be converted along the process of sending it to Power Query. I'm going to hit cancel, and the last method, method number 6, is to add this setup to the data model, which is Power Pivot. So if I click on the Power Pivot tab, and then I say I want to add this to the data model, when I click on Add to Data Model, it automatically displays a dialog box that recognizes the size of my list, and it recognizes that I have header. It checks the box that I have header. All what I need to do is to hit OK, and not only it will be converted into a table, but it will be sent to the Power Pivot data model window. I don't need that. I'm going to close it for now. And I'm back to Excel. 6 methods for converting a list into a table. Every time I hit Control L or Control T or use any one of the methods for converting a list into a table, the Create Table dialog box pops up, and there is a checkbox that is checked most of the time, denoting that my table has header. How did Excel recognize that my table has header? Let me explain this point. I have 3 columns, region, manager, and customer, and here when I hit Control L or Control T, the dialog box for Create a Table pops up, but my table has header is not checked. That's because Excel is totally confused right now. There is no difference whatsoever between the top row and the remaining row. So if I hit cancel and I make even a minimal difference in the formatting, like selecting the top row, and then I hit Control B to bold it, now if I want to convert it into a table by hitting Control T, the dialog box is checked. If I hit OK, I would have converted it into a table. I hit Control Z. And I'm going to unbold the top row, Control B one more time. And another way of having this box checked is to have a difference in the data type. So if I delete column L, Control minus to delete a column, now I have 4 columns. Look at column number 4 in column L. I do have sales, which is text, and I do have some sales amount, which are numbers. Now Excel can recognize the difference between the top row and the remaining row, and if I hit Control T, the box for my table has header is checked automatically. I can hit OK, and I would have converted this setup into a table. Let me delete this table. I'm selecting the 4 columns and I want to delete them. So I hit Control minus to delete. I want to show you one more option that you can create a table from a blank range. So if I select few cells and I say I'm preparing for creating a table, I want to create the functionality for a table. So I'm selecting some blank cells, and if I hit Control L or Control T, if I hit enter, my table has headers. I don't have headers. It makes no difference. I can edit them. When I hit OK, I would have created a table structure. I can edit the column names. I can enter my values, but I do have the functionality, and I can see the Table Design tab here at the top. We learned 6 methods for converting a list into a table. What about doing the opposite, sending a table back to a list? I want to convert a table into a range, and that can be done in three different ways. I select any single cell in the table, and then I go to the Table Design tab, and then I click on Convert to Range. When I click on Convert to Range, then Excel is going to confirm, are you sure you want to convert it to a range? You will be losing lots of options, and you will be maintaining one single benefit. The same functionality of converting to range is also available in the right-click menu. So if I right-click and then hover over table, I have the same option here, convert to range. When I give it a click, look at that. Excel can't believe that I want to convert a table into a range and lose the functionality. So if I hit yes, I'll be losing the Table Design Contextual Tab. I'll be losing the extra functionality, but the only thing that remains will be the formatting, and that's a tricky way of quickly formatting a setup or a list by converting it into a table and then back into a list. When I hit yes, I would have lost all the extra functionality. What remains is only the formatting. So this is the only advantage I get by converting a list into a table and then back into a list. Let's go to the next worksheet, selection, and there are different ways of selecting a list or a table. I want to compare between the two because some of the methods are common between a list and a table. I'm selecting any single cell into the list, which is to the left side, and the table is to the right side. And to select the entire list, I can use the shortcut Control A. A stands for all. Look what happens. My selection is in the middle of the list. When I hit Control A, I'm extending my selection to the entire list. This behavior is different in a table. So if I select a cell in the middle of the table and then I hit Control A, it will be selecting the entire table excluding the column headers. The Control A in a table works incrementally. So if you want to select the table headers, then you hit Control A second time and you would have selected all the table. I have a preference to using another shortcut other than the Control A. And this requires having a numeric keypad. I'll be using the multiplication symbol on the numbers keypad. I'll be using the asterisk, the multiplication symbol. I want you to look carefully at the difference between the Control A and the Control asterisk. I'm selecting the same starting cell, but when I hit Control asterisk, my active cell will be always the upper left corner of my list. So if I hit Control asterisk, not only I'm selecting the entire list, but my selection moves to the upper left corner. The other advantage of the Control asterisk is that the behavior of this shortcut is exactly the same whether you have a list or a table. I'm selecting a cell in the middle of the table, and this time if I hit Control asterisk, my active cell moves to the upper left corner and the entire table is selected in one go. What's the importance of having the active cell in the upper left corner? Assuming that you have a huge table of tens of thousands and rows, and you want to jump to the lower end of your table, look at this. I can rotate the active cell. And to rotate the active cell, I hit the shortcut Control period. Look at the active cell moving to the upper right, and then to the lower right, and then to the lower left. So if I hit Control period, I'm in the upper right corner. Control period, I'm in the lower right corner. Should you wish to shrink your selection to the active cell, you hit the shortcut Shift Backspace. I talked about two methods for selecting a list or a table. The Control A, and I compared the behavior and the difference between a list and table, and the Control asterisk, which is much better and requires using the numeric keypad. But we have some other techniques that are exclusive for a table. If you hover over the upper left corner of any table, keep an eye on the mouse pointer. When you see the mouse pointer appearing as a black arrow rotated like 45 degrees, if you give a click, then you will be selecting the table without the column header. It behaves exactly like the Control A. It works incrementally. If you click a second time, you will be selecting the entire table. So this is another method for selecting a table. There is another way of selecting a table. It's a little known technique. If you select any cell inside a table and you hover over any one of the borders of the table, when you see the mouse pointer changing to a four-headed arrow, a single click will select the entire table. Again, I select any cell, I hover over any border. When the mouse pointer changes to a four-headed arrow, I give it a click and I would have selected the entire table. Different methods for selecting a list and a table. Some of the techniques are exclusive for a table. We converted a list into a table, and we learned the only benefit of switching back into a list is to maintain the formatting, but we do have lots of benefits in a table. Let's talk about that. In this worksheet, I have a table, and I would like to explore the benefits that I'm getting by converting my list into a table. The first benefit that you get is the ability of formatting the table in one go. So by converting your list into a table, and you go to the Table Design tab, you see a gallery of styles. What is a style? A style is a package of formatting that you apply with one single click. It's a bunch of formatting that you apply with one single click. So I do have a style that was applied already, but I can change that style by hovering over the different thumbnails in the styles gallery. I do have more if I click on the more button. So I do have different styles. I can also, in a more advanced scenario, create my own style. I can set one of the styles as a default by right-clicking and selecting Set as Default. I can duplicate a style, or I can make modifications to any one of the styles. The style that you see in the thumbnails are affected by the different icons to the left side of the styles gallery. What if I say the first column is important, it has some labels, so if I check the first column, look what happens, all the styles and the thumbnails have changed based upon the box I checked. I'm going to uncheck first column. Another advantage that you get when you have a table is that when you scroll down, you always see the table headers. So right now, look at the column letters A, B, C, D, E. If I scroll down, then they have been replaced by the column headers, so I am always able to recognize and identify the meaning of my data by keeping an eye on the column header. That's the same exact functionality of freezing rows that you have on the View tab. It's a benefit that we get on the fly by converting our list into a table. Another advantage of converting the list into a table, that's called table auto expansion. So right now I have a date, a region, a manager, a customer, cost of goods sold, and sales. What if I want to add an extra column, let's say for the profit? So if I type profit, the moment I hit enter, this newly added column will be included inside the table. That's why we call it table auto expansion. It even inherits the formatting. This is one of the functionalities that you can reverse, and I'm going to show you how to reverse it if you don't like it. And the same applies if you add rows. Then my table expand to include these rows as well. Let me select these rows, and then I'm going to drag them and just drop them below the table, and look what happens. Automatically my table expands to include these rows. Let's undo, Control Z. The next benefit that we get is what we call the structured reference in a table. What does it mean, structured reference? When we create a table, it acquires a name. So if I click inside the table and go to the Table Design tab, to the left side of the Table Design tab, you can see the name of this table. It was table 1, 2, 3, 4, but you can edit it as I did. I named my table Benefits. So the name of the table is Benefits, and inside this table, each column acquires the name of the column header. So when I create a function, let's say I want to calculate the total profit, it will be using the table name and the column names. This is what we call the structured naming convention or the structured reference inside a table. So I would like to calculate the total profit. I'll be typing a sum function equals sum. Then I would like to subtract the sum of the cost of goods sold from the sum of sales. Inside the sum function, I don't need to type anything. So if I hover over the sales column and then I click, don't hover over letter F. If I click, I would select the entire column. No, I just need the sales. So I hover over sales, and when I click, look at this, I'm selecting all the sales. This is what we call the structured naming convention. Table name Benefits and the column name in square brackets. I want to subtract, so I type a minus sign, and then I hover over cost of goods sold. When I give it a click, then I close the bracket, I hit enter. That's the total profit. I can also create a calculation at the row level that will be using the structured naming convention of a table. So if I would like to calculate the profit for the first transaction, I type an equal sign, I click on the sales, and look at this, I have the column name in square bracket preceded by the @ symbol, which means at this row. If I type a minus sign and then I click on the other cell for the cost of goods sold, look what happens when I hit enter. The formula will be created in the entire column. The formula will spread in the entire column. This is what we call formula replication. I showed you three properties among the benefits: the table auto expansion, the structured naming convention, and the formula replication. If you don't like any of these options, you can turn them off, and let me show you how to turn them off. I have to go to the Excel Options dialog box by clicking on the File tab, click on Options to open the Excel options, or you can use the shortcut Alt-FT. In the Excel options, I go to Proofing, and here I click on Autocorrect, and in the Autocorrect dialog box, I click on the second tab. Here I have two options that I can turn off. Include new rows and columns in a table. This is table auto expansion. If you take the check away, then any new columns will not be included in the table. Fill formulas in tables to create calculated columns. This is the formula replication. If you don't like it, you can uncheck it from here. I'm going to hit cancel because I want to keep them. And the third option for the structured naming convention, if you go to formulas, if you don't like the structured naming convention in a table, then you can take the check away from use table names in formulas. I'm going to keep it as well. We do have some other benefits in a table. I can add a total row, and the total row enables me to create multiple aggregate calculations without the hassle of creating formulas and functions. I select any single cell in my table, and then I go to the Table Design tab, and then I check this box, Total Rows, and automatically a total row has been added. It's not a regular row, so if I would like to calculate the average profit, I just click in this cell, and there is a down pointing arrow. If I click on it, I could select average. I could calculate the total sales. I click here and then I select sum. This will be the total sales. If I want to find the maximum for the cost of goods column, if I click on that, I could select maximum. That's a beautiful functionality, the total row, and it enables me to switch functions from a drop list. I can remove the total row by taking the check away from total row. I can bring it back by using the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-T. When creating a table, it's a good practice to change the default name assigned to the table, and you do that by clicking on the Table Design tab, and to the left side of the Table Design tab, you can change the name by typing followed by hitting enter. Giving a descriptive name to a table is very useful, especially if you are going to use it in Power Query, so the name will travel with the table when you send it to Power Query. You can edit the name, you can change the name, you can view the name, or you can select the tables by their names. All the names of tables that you assigned in this workbook are available in the drop list of the name box. If you want to jump to a distant table, like the subtotal table, I click here and I was able to jump to that table. I want to go back to the benefits table, so I click on benefits and Excel takes me back to that table. If you want to edit the names, you go to the Formulas tab of the ribbon and you click on Name Manager. The shortcut is Ctrl-F3, and here, if you have multiple named ranges, some of them are table names, you can filter by clicking on the down arrow of the Filter button in the upper right corner and select just table names, and you get a list of all the tables. You can edit the name. I'm going to close. We talked about some benefits of a table. We still have a lot more, but before I do, I want to talk about adding records to a table, so I go to the next worksheet. You can add more records to a table. I'm using this table for calculating the total sales. So if I add more records, then the total sales will update automatically because the new records will be automatically included in the table. I can do that by selecting the last cell in the lower right corner, and then I hit the Tab key. That will add an extra row, and it inherits the formatting of the table, I can type, let's say, control semicolon for today's date. I can type a region, the East region. I can type a name for Nabil, and then I type any number 4576, and then I type another number, let's say 6587 for the sales. And when I hit enter, my total sales update, and I would have added a record. I could have done that without hitting tab, just by typing in the first empty cell under the table, or by copying records and put them immediately under the table, touching the records available in the table. The moment I release, these records will be included in the table and they will affect the total sales. Of course, they become part of the table. This is what we call table auto expansion. You can also resize a table by hovering over the small handle in the lower right corner. You can resize it by dragging up, so these two records are not part of the table anymore. You can drag down to include some other records. You can even include some blank records. You have a command for resizing a table. If you go to the Table Design tab, to the left side of the Table Design tab, we have Resize Table, and you can click and drag and select the range that you want to be included in the table. I'm going to hit Cancel for that. You might want to print a table. So if I go to the next worksheet, I have multiple tables. If you want to check how this worksheet will print, then you have to go to the print preview either by clicking on the File tab and select Print, or by hitting the shortcut Control P. P stands for printing. When I hit Control P, this is how the worksheet will look like when printed. But what if you want to print only the selected table? Then under Settings, you click on the down arrow, and we have an option for printing a selected table. If I click on that, then the only part of the worksheet that will print is the table having my selection. Microsoft recently introduced a functionality that is based on artificial intelligence. It looks at your list or table, and the functionality works exactly the same way, whether you have a list or a table. So what I'm going to explain right now applies to both of them. This functionality used to be called Ideas. So if you go to the Home tab, the Ideas command is available to the right side of the Home tab. Microsoft recently changed the name and gave Ideas functionality a more descriptive name, which is Analyze Data, and the group is called Analysis. So I'm going to click on Analyze Data. You will see that a pane will open on the right side. This is the new name, this is the old name. By this functionality, Excel is looking at my list or table and is analyzing it in different ways, and is even offering some visualization. So here is the cost by category and region. Here is the frequency of sales. If I wish to select any one of these visualization, I can simply click on Insert Chart and it will be added to the worksheet. You can also select a different option. Let's say I want to see the percentage of sale for each category. If I click here, then it will generate a pivot table and a pivot chart for me. So here is a preview of the pivot chart that will be created. The moment I click on Insert Pivot Chart, a new sheet will be created, and in this new sheet I have the pivot table and the pivot chart without the hassle of creating all this functionality and visualization. Thanks to the list or table and the new functionality Ideas, we were able to analyze our data in different ways. I'm going to close this pane, and I want to move to the next important functionality in a list or table. I click on Slicer, and here I have a table which shows a name, a class, and then I have a score for each student: math, science, reading, and total. I created a chart based on the total row. Here is the total row showing the average for each subject, and I created this chart. I want to make this chart dynamic by applying a filter or by applying a slicer. A slicer is a graphic filter. Before I show you the functionality of the slicer and how it will make my very simple chart extremely dynamic, I want to talk about another problem that we have in tables in Excel. This problem is the total dissociation between the filter functionality, the filter button available on the Table Design tab, and the filter button available on the Data tab. These two buttons are doing the same exact thing. So if I click on filter and I would like to bring it back and apply any kind of filtering, like let's say I want to select only one single class and then I hit OK, then I want to clear the filter and I want to remove the arrows. Now if I go to the Table Design tab, the filtering functionality has been deactivated. I don't know the reason why Microsoft is doing this, but it shouldn't behave that way. These two functionalities are identical, and whether I do it from the Data tab or I do it from the Table Design tab, they should synchronize together. Now, the only way to reactivate this button is by using the popular shortcut for filtering in Excel, Ctrl-Shift-L. That will bring back the functionality of this button. I can take the check away, and here the arrows are gone. I can bring them back. The bigger problem is if you want to apply a slicer, and the slicer is simply a filter, but it's a graphic filter. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to click on Insert Slicer, and by the way, inserting a slicer is also available on the Insert tab of the ribbon. Now if I click on Insert Slicer, and let's say I select a class for the slicer and then I hit OK, I'm going to improve the appearance of my slicer, and then I'm going to discuss the problem that happens with the slicer and the conflict between the slicer and the filter. So I want to improve the appearance of my slicer. As always, we have a slicer tab. On the slicer tab, I can split my column, my single column, into 3 columns. So I click on the up pointing arrow. I can resize my slicer. I can get rid of the header of the slicer by right-clicking on the slicer and select Slicer Settings. In the Slicer Settings dialog box, I take the check away from Display Header and then I hit OK. Now I can resize my slicer. I can even give it a style. We have some beautiful styles here. Let's apply one of the styles. Now what happens when I apply a slicer? I just want to see the interactivity of my chart when I'm filtering my table. So if I want only one class, comp 1010, look at that, my chart is very interactive. If I want comp 1115, comp 2035, everything is dynamic. But what happens to the filter? I'm actually filtering the class column. If I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, then the filtering functionality has been totally disabled. So I cannot do anything with the filter here, which I see wrong. It should be fixed because the slicer, the filter on the Table Design tab, the filter on the Data tab should always synchronize together. I'm going to release my slicer by dragging and selecting, and look on the Data tab. All the filtering functionality is disabled, while on the Table Design tab, if I select any cell, go to Table Design, the filter button is still working. So that's another problem with the table functionality in Excel that the Microsoft team has to look at. Let's look at the next functionality, which is creating a subtotal. So I click on the next worksheet, Subtotal, and here I want to define what is a subtotal. I have the same setup as a list on the left side, as a table on the right side, and for the list, I want to create a subtotal for each region. This subtotal could be the sum of cost of goods sold, the sum of sales, maybe the average. I could do that by creating a SUMIF function, a SUMPRODUCT function, but it's a lot easier to do it with a subtotal functionality. Let's understand how we do that. I'm selecting any cell in the region column because I want to create a subtotal for each region. Then it's a requirement to sort the region. I select any single cell in the region, and then I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, and I'm going to sort, let's say, ascending. So I have all the East region, followed by the North region, and so on. To create a subtotal, still on the Data tab of the ribbon to the right side, I click on Subtotal. The Subtotal dialog box opens, and here, at each change in, you definitely have to select the column to which you apply the sorting, which is the region column. You have multiple aggregate functions to select from, 11 functions, sum, count, average, max, min. I'll be selecting a sum function for now, as if I'm selecting a SUMIF function. Where would you like the result to appear? I want to sum the profit, I want to sum the sales, I'm checking boxes, I want to sum the cost of goods sold. Now if I hit OK, look at that, I would have created the subtotal at the change in the region column. From east to north, I have a subtotal. When we see these fences, we need to expand the column. So I'm selecting the 3 columns and I'm expanding. Look at that. I have a north total. I have a south total. Not only this, I created all these functions with the subtotal functionality, but in the upper left corner, I do have leveling buttons. So when I click on level 2, I go to a higher level of information, east total, north total, and so on. Should you wish to drill down into details, you click on level 3. That's the outlining tool, and this is the subtotal tool. To remove the subtotal, I use the same dialog box one more time. Select one single cell, click on subtotal, or use the shortcut Alt-AB. In the subtotal dialog box, I click on remove total. That was the functionality of the subtotal in a list. What about a table? You will be disappointed, because if you click inside a table, the subtotal command doesn't even exist. It has been totally grayed out. So this is another recommendation to the Excel team, looking at the subtotal functionality in a table. In my next example, I have a table coming from Power Query. Unlike the previous table that were created in the worksheet, this table is coming from Power Query. It might come from other or multiple workbooks, or it might come from a different source, and then I get the data into the Power Query window, I clean it and transform it and send it back to Excel. A table coming from Power Query inherits the name of the query. So if I go to the Table Design tab, the name is Countries, and that's the name of the query in the Power Query window. Also, there are some of the functionalities that are activated only for tables coming from Power Query, and here the group says external table data. So if you look at the properties, this one is grayed out if the table was created in Excel, and the same for unlink. Let's see one of the previous tables. If I click on this table, the properties and the unlink are grayed out. Let's go back to Power Query and explain some of the properties in tables coming from Power Query. When you refresh the query, the width of the column might change. Like this. I'm going to refresh this query by clicking on Refresh. And the width of the column changes every time when I refresh my query. If you are happy with that, keep it the way it is. Otherwise, if you want to adjust the width of the column and you don't want it to change anymore, then you click on Properties, and here we have an option, Adjust Column Width. Take the check away from this option and then hit OK. You might also want to add some row numbers. So if you click on Properties and you check the box Include Row Numbers, if you hit OK and then refresh, you get the row numbers. I don't want the row numbers, so I'm going to click on Properties, take the check away from Include Row Numbers, hit OK and refresh, and I get rid of the row numbers. Sometimes you see this little icon to the left side of each cell in a table coming from Power Query. That's a new functionality called Custom Data Types. I created some custom data types in Power Query. That's why I see this little icon. So if I click on it, it's called Show Card. It will show me some other columns. Creating custom data types simply means you have multiple columns related to each other, related information, a product name, a product description, a category, a subcategory, a product code, and you want to squeeze all of them in one single column, then you create what we call a custom data type. I'm here creating one very simple custom data type for the country, and if I wish to bring the capital, I click on capital and it will be added. I'm not discussing custom data type, but I just wanted to draw your attention to this little icon because the data is coming from Power Query where I created custom data types. Another problem when dealing with tables in Excel. Now, so many users are familiar with dynamic arrays available in Microsoft 365. And here I have a table which shows a first name, a last name, a phone number, address, city, state, email, married, and balance. And I want to extract records based on multiple conditions, a condition in the state and a condition in the married column. And I want the returned column to be in a specific order, and I'm not extracting all the columns, I'm extracting just some of the columns. I explained in a previous tutorial how to do that, so I encourage you to watch that tutorial, how to filter separate columns in Excel by using dynamic array functions. If you look at this cell in the upper left corner, here is the dynamic array function that I used for extracting dynamically. After doing this, I want to convert my spilled array into a table, and that's not possible. It's not possible so far to convert a spilled array into a table or to send it to Power Query using the regular techniques. Let's see what happens if I want to convert this spilled array generated by a dynamic array function. So I'm going to use the shortcut Control T and look at the unpleasant surprise. When I hit Control T and then I hit Enter, it gives me a spill error. Let's undo, Control Z. Okay, why not try to send it directly to Power Query? So to send it to Power Query, I go to the Data tab of the ribbon, and then here I want to click on From Table Range in order to force the conversion into a table and send it to Power Query. When I hit OK, look what happens. I get a set of null errors. And if I close the query to go back to Excel after discarding this query, I get the same spill error. I hit Ctrl Z to undo. So we have a problem with the result of dynamic array functions. When we want to analyze it in Power Query, this functionality doesn't work and I'm unable to convert it into a table. Although I'm not focusing in this tutorial on Power Query, but let me show you quickly a workaround. I'm going to create a named range that stores the result of the dynamic array function. To do that, I click on the Formulas tab of the ribbon, I click on Define Name, I give it a name, let's say Nabil. This refers to this cell, and I add the hash sign, which means all the spilled array symbol. So I have a range named Nabil. Can I send this range to Power Query? No, I can't, but I have to use a tricky way. Sending a regular table, I select this table, and this table is named DataB. So if I click on the Data tab of the ribbon, and I send it to Power Query by clicking on From Table or Range, it works fine. Then I don't want the change type. I go to the source, and here I change the name of the table. Instead of DataB, I'm going to cheat and put the name of the table having the dynamic array range. I named it Nabil, and now if I hit enter, now I was able to send it to Power Query, and I can continue working, naming the columns, doing all kind of transformation. I don't want to do that, so I'm closing my table and I discard the result of the query. We talked about different problems when dealing with tables in Excel. Some of them are just inconvenience for some users, like the formula replication, the table auto-expansion, and the structured naming convention in a table, and I showed you how to reverse them from the Excel Options dialog box. But some other problems really need the attention of the Microsoft Excel team, like the lack of synchronization between the filter on the Table Design tab and the filter on the Data tab, between the slicer and the filter. There should be a full synchronization. Another problem is the Subtotal command, which doesn't work in case of a table. The third problem is a spilled array range that cannot be converted into a table. And one more problem: if you copy multiple worksheets simultaneously, having tables, I'm selecting, by pressing Shift, I'm selecting 4 sheets. And if I want to copy them to a new workbook, by right-clicking and select Move or Copy, and here I select New Workbook, and I want to create a copy. Usually it works, and the 4 sheets should be copied all together to a new workbook. But because they have tables, they cannot be copied. If I hit OK, I get this message box saying you cannot copy or move a group of sheets that contain a table. I hit OK and I'm totally helpless, and I have to do that sheet by sheet or convert all the tables into lists and copy all the sheets in one go. Multiple problems that we discussed, and this is a call to the Microsoft team to pay attention to these problems and fix them as soon as possible. We talked earlier about the functionality of the total row, but now I would like to show you some very nice tips and tricks related to the total row. You can add a total row to your table by checking the box for total row. Alternatively, you can use the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-T. Excel automatically takes me to the end of table to show the total row, and here I can change the function. So for the profit, I'll keep the sum. I want to add a sum for the sales. I can do that by hitting the shortcut Alt down arrow. I select sum. For the cost, I want the sum as well. Alt down arrow, and I select sum. What happens if I cut this entire total row? I'm selecting the total row, and I hit Ctrl X. I want to jump to the top of my worksheet, Ctrl Home, and here I'll be pasting my total row, Ctrl V. Did I disconnect it from the table? We'll see in a moment. So that's the total. But the beautiful thing is, I can add another total row. So if I go down to the end of my table, Ctrl down arrow, I can add another total row by checking the box for total row. This time, I'll be selecting an average for the profit, sales, and cost. I select the entire total row, Ctrl X to cut it, Ctrl Home to jump to the top, and below the total row that I pasted earlier, I'm going to paste this new one, and I change the label to average. Let's add one more. So if I select any cell in the table, and then I go to the Table Design tab, and then check the box for total row, this time I'll be adding a max for the profit, sales, and cost. And I select the entire new total row. I cut it one more time. I jump to the top, Control Home, and paste it below the average, Control V, and this time I'll change the label to max. Instead of having one single total row at the end of my table, I do have multiple aggregate calculations giving me more insights about my data. And the beautiful thing is, I can filter my data and look at these three aggregate functions, what they will do. So if I hit the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-L, now I just want to see one of the regions. Let it be the East region. So I check the box for East, I hit OK, and all the numbers are changing, and I'm getting much more valuable insights by creating multiple total rows, copying them to the top, and don't have to scroll down in order to look at one single calculation. One more functionality available on the Table Design tab is the ability of removing duplicates from a table. I do have in column A table showing different regions. If I go to the Table Design tab, I have an option for removing duplicates on the left-hand side. It's the same exact option that is already available on the Data tab, and it will trigger the same dialog box, removing duplicates. I'll be using it from the Table Design tab. I click on Remove Duplicates, and I want to remove duplicates from the region. I hit OK, and it keeps one single occurrence of each region. I hit OK to accept, and now I can use the list of unique values available in column A in a table format in order to create a data validation drop list. So I'll be creating my data validation drop list in cell C2 by going to the Data tab of the ribbon and click on Data Validation. I want to allow a list, so I select List. I put my blinking cursor in the source box. I hover over the region, and from here I want to select the different regions, and I hit OK, and I would have created my drop list. Let's select one of them. What happens if I add more regions? Because this is a table format, then if I drag more regions, The table auto expansion functionality will include the newly added region, the newly added values to my table, and accordingly, if I click on the down arrow of my drop list, I will see the new values as well. And because we are talking about duplicate values, what if you have two tables and you want to compare if there are duplicate values between the two tables? Look at this beautiful tip. I do have a table in column E and a similar table in column G. Some of the names are common in the two tables. And in order to compare, I'm going to select all the names in the first table. I press Ctrl and select all the names in the second table. And to identify the duplicates between the two tables, I go to the Home tab of the ribbon. And on the Home tab, I click on Conditional Formatting. And from the menu, I select Highlight Cell Rule. And I go down to Duplicate Values. Automatically, the duplicate values are highlighted. I'll be accepting the default for the color, and now I can see which values are repeated in both lists. We can do the exact opposite by finding the differences between two tables or two lists. And to do that, I'm going to compare between the table in column I and the table in column K. So if I select the list of names in column I, and then I press Ctrl and select the list of names in column K, now I could compare between the two by using the same command on the Home tab, Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cell Rule, Duplicate Values. But here look at the difference. Instead of using duplicates, I click on the down pointing arrow in the left drop list and I select the unique values. I want to change the color. I'll make it green. And now when I hit OK, I see the unique values in each list. As a bonus topic in this tutorial, I created two VBA codes for you that you can copy and paste in your worksheet. One of them is to convert a list into a table, and the other one is to convert a table into a list. We talked about some problems in tables, and I hope that the Excel team will be able to fix these issues that we discussed earlier. I would also like to add a recommendation for the design of the Table Design tab. And my recommendation is to make two changes. The filter button is tightly related to the slicer functionality, and it should be moved to the Tools group rather than being in the Style Options group. It has nothing to do with style. So moving the filter button to be next to the slicer will make more sense. And to make it even more clear, we can move the 6 options related to the table style options instead of having them to the left side of the style gallery. And to avoid confusion, we can also move them to the right side. If you found value in this tutorial, give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already done that, and ring the bell to be notified when new tutorials are released. The best is yet to come. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.